Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for week 2 of ACX University 2016. I'm Hannah Wall and I will be your moderator for today's panel. Now hear this, a closer look at performing top audiobook genres. I am coming to you from the Newark Venture Partners space in Newark, New Jersey, and I am joined by 3 wonderful guests today to talk about acting with a capital A. My guests today are Mark Boyett. Mark is an Earphones award-winning actor with 7 years of audiobook experience. He works with both Audible Studios and ACX, and is best known for his work in the sci-fi genre, including Warship by Joshua Dalzell and 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. To my right is Piper Goodeve. Piper is also an award-winning narrator, known for her work in the romance genre. Piper divides her time between her booth in Vermont and her apartment in Brooklyn, and you may hear her turns in Jacinda Wilder's Falling Into You or Sky Jordan's Renegade series. Lastly but not least, to my left, Kat Lambrix. She's the senior producer for the Grammy Award-winning Audible Studios. Kat started her career in producing museum audio tours until discovering audiobooks in 2006. And her most recent productions include directing Mahershala Ali and the audiobook production of the upcoming film Free State of Jones. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So glad. So today we're talking about performing in best-selling genres. Romance, sci-fi, mysteries and thrillers, teen and young adult, nonfiction. But before we go too far, let's talk about you. So Piper, give us a little bit about your background, how you came into acting, and then how you came into audiobook acting.
Yeah, well, I started acting in New Hampshire, where I grew up. There was a great children's theater there where I did summer theater every year. And then I went to NYU for undergrad for dramatic literature and English, so I didn't do an acting undergraduate degree. And then I went and got my master's at Brown in Rhode Island in classical acting. And I found that audiobooks are actually the perfect mush of both degrees, because I get to read all day long like I did as an English major, and then I also get to act them, obviously. So, and then I came to audiobooks through Kat Lambrix, who I met in 2000.
2000 and
Exactly, 2000 and she was teaching an audiobook class in New Jersey, and I was teaching an acting class beforehand, and we would pass each other in the hallways. And one day she was like, "Hey, if you ever want to stay and sit in on my audiobook class, you're welcome to." And I was like, "Oh, books on tape! I loved those as a kid. I'll see what that's about." I'd never thought of it as an actual career, and I fell in love with it from the first class, and I just kept going every week. And Kathy was very welcoming. And at the end of that, she brought me in to audition at Audible, and I've been doing it ever since. So.
Wonderful. Mark, how about you?
I did undergrad acting at the University of Texas, and then graduate level acting training at the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, and was an actor, I guess, for sort of making my living as an actor for 10 years or so. When I was doing, this is how I got into audiobooks. I was doing a show at the Cleveland Playhouse with Gabra Zachman, who we all know, and she was playing my wife, and I asked her what else she did for money, because most actors have other jobs of some kind, and I think I was waiting tables in between jobs at that time, and she mentioned that she did audiobooks. And I did as every actor that ever works with her does, and said, "You should give me an audition." And she did manage to work that out, and it went well, and I've been doing audiobooks ever since. So that was about 7 years ago.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Kat, you're the producer of the group. What's your story?
me. So my undergraduate degree is in art history, and like most art history majors, I do absolutely nothing with that at all. I came out of college and I was producing audio tours for museums and spending an awful lot of time at the studio. When MoMA did their reinstallation of their permanent collection, I managed all of that, and it was 4 tours in 7 languages. So I basically lived in the studio for about a month or 2. And I thought, hey, I like being here. This is really fun. I love the studio. I really like to learn how to work with all of this. So I came on board at CDM Studios with Charles de Montebello, who taught me just about everything I know about recording and editing. And I was there for 2 years. And we did a lot of audiobooks, we did some commercial work, some ADR, but audiobooks really were so interesting to me because I love reading and I love literature and I love working with actors. So when one of the guys from another studio was leaving to come to Audible, I said, hey, that's really funny, I live in Newark, I can see that place from my house. Like, if there's ever an opening, it would be so cool. I could like walk to work, and sure enough, 6 months later I get an email, hey, there's an opening, you should come in. So I came, 8 years ago for my first interview, and the rest is history. I've been here, with Mike Charzik ever since.
That's awesome. Very cool. So you guys both started out with something very important, audiobook coaching and training. Tell me a little bit about, Piper, we'll start with you, what your audiobook specific acting experience has been, your training experience.
Training specifically for audiobooks.
Yeah.
Well, the best teacher of all time, Kat Lambrix. I've not been paid to say that. Yeah, well, I just remember, and now I teach audiobook acting, and I still tell this to all my students. Something that Kat had us do in that class many years ago was, she said, go to your shelf and take down any book that's on your shelf, not your favorite book, because a lot of times in this job you'll narrate something that's not necessarily exactly what you want to be reading or doing, and sit down and read that straight for half an hour. And when you mess up, go back to the beginning and start again. And if by the end of it you're still like, this is awesome, then this work is probably for you. And if by the end of that half an hour you're like, I cannot bear the sound of my own voice anymore, I can't see straight, this might not be the profession that you want to go into. And the second I got home, just went straight to my shelf and I picked out like 7 books and couldn't get enough, and was like, oh, I think this might actually be something that I really want to do. And I think what's important about that in terms of acting is that you have to be curious about it. I think the best actors that I know and see on stage are curious about everything that they're doing. And when you're reading, those of us who are lucky enough to be working in audiobooks all the time, you're reading different books every week. You're prepping one book while you're recording another book. And if you're not curious about all of the things that are going on in each of those books, zombies, Martians, romance of the South, all of those things, you're not gonna, it's not gonna come across in your voice and in the way that you embody those characters. So I hope that answered your question.
That's good. That's good. So Mark, you were on the stage at the time that you discovered audiobooks. What was that, transition like to going from a multi-cast production to being a one-man show, and how do you reconcile yourself to the multitude of characters you have to play?
It's very different. Obviously, when you're doing a play, you get the interplay with other people. You also get a lot of rehearsal. You always used to a lot of rehearsal. And sort of discovering the story just from that you're telling with these other people, just from your character's perspective. And so that was what I was used to doing in terms of approaching telling this particular story, just from, I really only cared about my character's perspective. And I mean, thematically, when we were doing table work, of course, we would talk about the themes and stuff in the play, but then going from that to playing a lot of different characters, and having no rehearsal. Well, I mean, I think of prep time as rehearsal, and it's quite different. So now you just have to put yourself in every character's shoes, and you don't have someone else to play off of. And that's quite different, and can feel a little lonely sometimes. At first it did a little, until I just learned to really just put myself in each character's circumstances and intentions and desires, and just jump around, and I guess once it was kind of lonely in there. Luckily, when I started, I mostly work with an engineer, which helps a lot. Mm-hmm. It gets really lonely recording yourself. I feel for people who do a whole lot of that. I mean,
What do you do to overcome that loneliness?
Freaking take breaks. I don't know. Call somebody.
Make up more voices in the studio, right?
Sure,
Do you like the voice of your best friend is now in this book. Piper's now in my book.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just you just deal with it. I guess. So yeah. Another difference though between going from the theater, sort of a similarity and difference of going from a theater background to a microphone audiobook background. I think my theater training, I haven't had any official audiobook training. I would love to take your class.
You're welcome. Just come sit right in on it.
Thank you so much. But I had really good vocal training at my graduate school. Bonnie Raphael is the best. And I think that really helped a lot getting into this industry because I can talk for hours and hours before my voice starts to get tired. And I think people who don't have that experience, I'm a fan of, I don't know what kind of vocal training you guys have had or where, but Arthur Lesak is a particular vocal guy that talks about moving the voice forward and using, becoming acquainted with your soft palate versus your hard palate and things like that have been a big help to me going for long hours doing this. So that's one place where, of course, it's you don't project as much, but anyway,
you're still supporting in the same sort of way.
Yeah.
So Kat, you're the coach, you're the teacher. What are some of those newbie hallmarks, things that people have to overcome really? What are your beginners needing to overcome to make it to the next level?
It's mostly the fatigue, and when we're working with actors who come from stage and screen, we had one guy who said, I was on set for 18 hours yesterday. And I said, that's great, I'm really glad that you have that, that ability to keep going. I said, but you're going to be performing for 6 hours at a time, and this is a one-man show. So you've got to make it work, and you've got to reconcile yourself to that it's just you, and you alone are responsible for this. Like, yes, I can coach you, and I can give you tips, and we can talk about voices and pronunciation, but this is you. Like, you have to know this, and you have to be confident in it, and then you have to let it go when you step into the booth. You know your story, you know your characters, you know how this writer is writing, you've maybe had a discussion with your author, and then you just let the story flow because it's acting and it's storytelling. And I think that's something that some people come into this thinking, oh, it's just acting. And it's a little bit more than that. You have to be able to weave a tale for people, and you have to be able to keep people's interest and not hurry through those he said, she says and the exposition. The dialogue is really interesting, and that's what everybody loves. And when you're reading, you skip right to the dialogue, and what are my characters saying? But there's all of that in between that somebody has written that you have to give the space and the time to allow your listener to digest that. So that's something that we work on a lot is pacing, taking things slow enough for your listener who's not reading along to digest every single thing that you're saying and really giving justice to those words that have been written on the page. And then we work on mechanical things like keeping your energy up. We work a lot with different actors who will take a break and do some yoga or run a couple laps, which is fantastic to see at my desk. I'm like, who's running today? But we have sit-to-stand tables in all the studios now. So if somebody wants to stand, if that keeps them going. And there are a ton of different methods that people use. We also work on, keeping your vocal health really, really high and not going out the night before. Sometimes people will read the whole book out loud, like a couple days before they come in to perform it, which is maybe not the thing you want to do. You want to protect that instrument. You don't want to overuse it.
What are some other ways that folks can go about protecting their voices?
Obviously, don't go out the night before, maybe lay off the drinks. But also, different people have different dietary things too. We get a lot of kind of stomach issues. Lots of people stay away from dairy, from spicy food, from anything new. Like, have your same old breakfast every morning before you go into the studio. Don't try a quinoa shake that morning. Because God knows what it's going to do to your stomach.
Very rumbly.
Yeah, we have pillows in the studio to cover that up, but it's really not ideal. But just taking care of your body as a whole and keeping yourself healthy in that shape where you can get in there and perform, where you don't have to think about your body or, am I sounding clicky or is my throat dry or am I getting the sniffles? so you can let go of all of that and just perform and just tell that story in the studio is really the most important part, to let that take over.
That's excellent. Okay. So as people are getting ready, what's your preparation process for a book? How long are you taking on a book, or are you just jumping right into it? I know going slowly into it obviously is, and being well prepared, but what is well prepared to you guys?
If it's an author I've never worked with before, I will usually read the book twice before I go into the studio if I have time. Sometimes things are on deadlines and it's, you have a week to prep and then you're all of a sudden in the studio. But I like to get a real feel for that author's writing. If it's someone that I've done multiple books for, by that point I know their style. We have a good relationship and communication, so I usually just read it that one time. And really researching where it takes place, who these people are, if they have a crazy profession or even a profession that's, well known that I want to learn more about. I definitely research the author and speak to the author. Just to anything that can flesh out, just like in plays, anything that fleshes out the skeleton that's there and that you can then add on to and create a fully realized performance. I don't ever like to start a book. I had a book that I was supposed to start last week that I had just set that schedule for myself, and I actually pushed it to start next week because I was like, I want to go back and read certain sections again. I want to talk to the author about this specific character. I want to make sure that, like Kat said, like when you're getting in the booth, that you're not thinking about all of those things, that you've done all of that work and you have your notes, and then you can just let it go and perform it. Otherwise, exactly like when you're on stage, if you haven't done all that memorization and preparation, that you'll get on stage and just be too in your head and not able to let it go.
Mark, how about you?
Oh, sorry.
No,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to jump in and kind of give Piper a shout out. So she's got these great relationships with her authors, which I think is one of the great advantages of ACX, because you've got your author right there and you can contact them directly and ask them for notes or exactly. And you can develop these great relationships with them that become more than just work relationships, because when you're performing a book, this is somebody's work and someone is letting you into their world and giving you the privilege of working with them to bring it to life for listeners. So I think that's a really important relationship to cultivate. And then you wind up in the position like Piper is, where you're going, 7, 8, 9 books into someone's series, and you're feeling great about it because you know these characters and this style, and you know this person that you're working with so well.
And you know then what that author wants from the final product. Also, you know what that stylistically you match up, and then, I do feel so lucky to have, especially the relationship with Jacinda Wilder, where, now it's when I'm reading her books, I'm like, it's like how I talk half the time, because it doesn't feel, I don't have to be like, what is this sentence structure? How is this going to roll off my tongue? Because her writing, like, we just gel so well together that it's seamless and it just feels like one long monologue, which is then also the most fun to perform, because it is like a long monologue. Pretty much.
So we've got some questions from the audience, so I'm going to try and jump over here and grab one of these. I think now's a good time. So Ian M. asks, how do you separate and identify individual character voices across the whole audiobook? So, Mark, when you're establishing all those characters during your prep, how are you deciding what voices get what treatment? And then how are you establishing them across the growth of the book?
Yeah, and how do you keep all those aliens straight?
Well, what I do is, when I'm prepping the book, the first thing to take note of is, one thing that's good about doing a lot of sci-fi is that usually in a sci-fi book, not just the aliens, but usually in a sci-fi book, Earth has come together to encounter the aliens in one way or another. So we'll be on a spaceship where there's lots of different dialects, which actually is great because it means the Chinese guy isn't going to sound like the Russian guy, isn't going to sound, and usually there's only one of each. There's not usually, although that is not true. I just did a book with a bunch of Russian guys and a bunch of Chinese guys, and that was a little tricky. But so the first thing to do is to pay attention to what the dialects are, and you do this long enough, and you kind of have a few dialects in your back pocket, but you are also I always encounter one that doesn't come up as often, maybe a Jamaican guy or a Scottish guy, or who knows, something that I don't do a lot, and so then I need to go and work on that dialect, obviously, which YouTube is great for, and other can talk about websites and stuff. But so that's the first thing, and then to when I do you do this? I color code each character, so every character gets his or her own color.
I do that now that we have the iPads. Because it's easy in the iPad to
What
highlight
app are you
it.
using?
I annotate. Yeah, it's
Okay.
amazing.
Very popular.
I often get stopped on the subway when I'm prepping, and someone's like, "What? I'm sorry, what?" And I'm always like afraid that they've been reading over my shoulder sometimes, but they always ask what program that is. I'm like,
it's really great, and the updates have made it super user friendly. But so each character gets a color, so that way when I'm reading along, I don't. A lot of times you can't tell who it is because it doesn't say who said the line until well into it. So, but if it's green, I know it's this character, whatever. And then what was the rest of the question? The tracking it through the book?
Yeah, keeping track of.
And you also asked when, I do an odd thing. I've heard about narrators working on their voices beforehand. I don't do that. I go in now dialect work aside, but in terms of how the character talks, where the voice is placed in the mouth, I make that decision on the fly in the room.
Interesting.
I feel it when I'm there. Now, I know enough about the character generally by then to know if it's a scheming type of person or
Sure.
or a caffeinated type woman or guy or whatever, But I don't do that. I don't. So yeah.
Interesting. Are you making choices on the fly like that also, or?
Pretty much, but again, on the fly.
Informed
Meaning,
on
like,
the
I'm
fly.
not,
Right,
sitting
of
there
course.
practicing it over and over again, unless it's a dialect. But, I do take a lot of notes on paper. This thing called paper. Where, I find, again, in the prep that I can't usually voice a character unless I have a mental image of them, and either the writing has been so detailed and so great that I know exactly who that character is from the descriptions by the author, or if it's a little, if it's a little vague or not as fully fleshed out because it's a secondary character, I need to come up with a real life person or a celebrity that I'm reminded of, so that then as I'm reading, I'm picturing the scene that's happening with real actual people, and that way I can then place where they talk, if it's like farther back in the mouth or more forward or quick or slow or all of that, because I have the whole person visualized.
Now, do you base your voices on how that person sounds in real life? Like, does your
Sometimes.
mom appear
Are
in
you
your
doing an
audiobooks?
impression?
Like Christine Bam's mom appears in a ton of her audiobooks, and I love it. I'm like, this is mom.
I think it's funny because actually whenever I impersonate my mom, she doesn't sound like that at all. It's like standard mom voice, or like boyfriend voice. Like no one's boyfriend actually talks like that, right? It's not like I've never met anyone whose boyfriend is like, but that's like,
What about you, Mark? Do you have like specific actors that or people in your life that you base your voices on?
No, mostly. There's one voice that comes up with certain kinds of characters that I'm blanking on the actor's name, but Dirty Harry, Make My Day.
Yeah.
What's his name? What's the actor's name?
Now we're all gonna forget.
The older fella. Now he
It's gonna be
makes.
comments.
Now we've all forgotten.
all
Now
over
we
you.
Maybe
direct
somebody will
movies.
write it and tell us who it is.
He
Tell us in the
directs-
comments who we're thinking of.
Oh my God! so embarrassing.
I just read a really
Clint
great.
Eastwood.
Thank you.
So yeah, there is a voice that I do. I'm not going to do it now. I'll be embarrassed. But
Why?
oh,
I just
yeah.
read a really great interview with Luke Daniels, who said that he has these recurring characters who I think he's kind of made up, who come back in all of his books, and he's kind of given them
Oh,
names
yeah,
and personas,
yeah.
which I thought was so interesting that it's not based on a real person, but here's this like imaginary person who comes
Yeah.
back time after time, and I think some listeners have started to identify those voices and
funny.
those characters.
That's really funny.
Well, at the end of the day, you can only do so many voices.
Right.
Right.
And so there are certain things that are going to come back,
Yeah. Definitely.
in different,
And
and they feel like it's a cast of characters, like a company of characters that are showing up in different books.
Yeah.
It can feel like that.
This is probably the only field that you can work in that you can have like a cast of voices in your
Right,
head, and it's
right.
totally
Totally.
fine.
It's encouraged.
So, Kat, you're on the other side of the glass. So, how much directing of their choices of voices are you doing? Or are you just kind of letting the actor run with what feels good? When do you step in when it doesn't sound quite right?
I generally let the actors go, because this is their craft, and as long as they're well prepared, they're gonna nail it 99 times out of 100. If something sounds inauthentic, I will definitely stop them. If they're not hitting, a dialect right, or if their cadence is off, that happens sometimes. If the dialogue is written kind of oddly, but other than that, I really just kind of let folks go. The biggest thing I do is slow people down, and that's really just when they're starting out. I find that when one of these guys gets in the flow, it's best to just let them go. And if there is something in there, if they're in the middle of a pivotal scene, let them go. We'll go back and we'll do it later, and maybe we'll redo the whole scene later. But I never want to take someone out of that moment, and pull them out of what they're doing in that headspace, because it's so important to be in that headspace. And these guys as actors really tend to focus so well in the booth, and then it's really fun to come out and get wacky for a couple of minutes, and then you go back in and you head right back into that material.
So how do you handle that when you guys are in an intense moment and maybe you're just not hitting that line right? Like, do you walk away from it? Like, do you just push through it? Like, what's your approach?
Depends on how late it is.
Depends.
How close we are to the end of the chapter.
Yeah, and I think it depends on if it's something that I feel like I need to step away and go for a walk around and then come back to because I just need to get out of my own head, or if it's something where I need to just sit and I just say, just give me a minute and just refocus myself and then go. Like I've had both of those things happen.
A luxury of working with an engineer is that you have someone to share your frustration with.
Yeah.
Although I have done it in the booth by myself, and that usually involves a certain amount of cursing and yelling, and then you get that blow off that steam, and then you go right back into the narration. That helps a lot, actually.
And also about the voices, talking about the direction of the voices. I had a book here a couple months ago, and I had a very interesting character, but I was concerned about voicing that character. And I was working with an engineer here who I knew had years and years and years of experience, and these engineers are invaluable. I tell my students this all the time. The engineers are an invaluable resource because these guys and girls listen to hundreds of books. There's only so many books we can narrate in a week before our voice is just shot, and the engineers are listening and listening and listening. And so I had this one character that I was like, I'm not sure. It's written to be slightly German, but he's hiding that he's German because he doesn't want anyone to know that he's German. But the writing has said he mushes his W's softly, like a whisper, something like that. Where I was like, it's very specifically described, so I have to honor it. And so he and I just played around until we found what that voice was, and then he marked it, and I could always go back and he would play that marking for me whenever I started to get off. But it was great because I didn't want it to be a character it was a main character, so I didn't want it to be something that was unlistenable. Is that a word?
It is now.
Yes, thank you. And I knew that he had the ears to know whether or not it was going to be something that was easy to listen to for the entire book. And I'm very thankful for those types of relationships and in terms of the performance.
Yeah, very much. Also thinking about the character, the question that came in. I think part of the question was about tracking it through the book when you pick a voice. I think you just mentioned an important thing, which is you can flag the first time or the second or the third or an early time that a character speaks, and then if you need to go back and reference that, then you can. I don't know if that's a given. People know that,
that's a good tip.
But it is important because you don't want someone to suddenly be talking very differently than they did before or whatever, But when you've done it a while, you do start to just sort of. I find myself that rarely going back and listening now because I just feel where it was in my voice when I'm doing it, and I kind of remember that.
We talked a little bit about dialects, and I want to go back to kind of a different kind of dialect, which is Conlang. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar, conceived languages.
Oh, conceived languages.
Yeah,
okay.
so when
you knew that.
you're probably the most experienced of all, in these sci-fi and fantasy spaces where authors are making up languages and locations, and there isn't necessarily a set pronunciation on how these words are decided, but you have to make a decision, and then that decision is maybe the fans didn't hear the word that way when they read it on the page, and then you're making a decision there. What's your process for deciding those things?
The first thing to do is contact the author.
Okay.
When I'm prepping the book, I make a thorough list of all these words or names. That's the most important thing to do. But I've had authors not get back to me, in which case I kind of feel like then I'll pick how to do it, and there is no wrong. But most of the time they do, and so that's the most important thing. But then you've got to remember the way that oddly spelled word. So, I if I'm working with an engineer, he or she will flag that word or make a note. If I'm doing it by myself, I might use my iPhone to, record how to say that word and then type it out so I can find it. Yeah.
I think it's important to note that there is no wrong on this stuff. I mean, unless there's an accepted pronunciation and it's Klingon, or you have an author who has said, okay, well, here's my pronunciation guide. They're really not actually words. So however you decide to say them, as long as you keep it
just
consistent,
be consistent.
is right and it is correct.
Yeah.
When I first started here at Audible, one of the things I did was help our narrators with pronunciations, and it was a sci-fi book, and I remember the word, it was just a whole bunch of consonants like mashed together, and I looked at it, I was like, oh, what do we do with this? So I contacted the author, and he said, we're so excited to be producing your book. I just have a question about this word. There don't seem to be any vowels in it. And he wrote back and he said, oh, that was totally a joke. I put that in there in case people decided to try to learn to speak this word. Just say mollusk, it's fine.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Okay, absolutely. Okay. So we went with it, and I think we kind of mushed the word a little bit so it wasn't actually mollusk, but it was okay, some of these authors are really funny with this stuff and have a great sense of humor about this, especially within the sci-fi genre. Yeah. So much of it is so serious, and it's about intergalactic takeovers, and then you have somebody who's making up this language, and they're like, whatever, just say shellfish, it's fine.
You and the team at Audible Studios, do you guys put together pronunciation sheets for your actors when you work with them, and do you have any tips for what to, where to look up these pronunciations?
Oh, Hannah, I'm so glad you asked. We will put together pronunciation resources. If we have to, mostly we lean on our actors to do it, because they're really skilled at doing it after 10, 15, 20 years in the business. And there's a great list out there of different websites you can go and look stuff up. Forvo is great. I think everybody kind of has that little list. But the one thing that I find to be really helpful that I always tell people is when you're looking up proper names, you've got to find an interview with this person, and don't look for someone else saying the name. Look for the person saying the name themselves, because sometimes the interviewer gets it wrong, and you're always going to say your name right, even if somebody else doesn't. But we've run into that in the past, and we also had a case where someone was watching an interview on BBC. And the announcer said the name one way, but the American pronunciation was different. So that was really fun, having to go back and re-record most of that book. So make sure you find the person saying their own name. When it comes to brand names and locations, you can always call. You can always call a company and ask them, hey, just checking, how do you say this? You can always call a library or a chamber of commerce.
I called a zoo in Wisconsin once.
That's amazing.
Because I didn't know how to pronounce it, and it was in the book.
It was the zoo itself? Or
it was the name of the zoo, and it was somebody's last name. It's probably very famous in Wisconsin, and I'm going to be very embarrassed. But yeah, I just called and listened to the answering machine.
Oh, the answering machine is even better if you call during off hours.
You're I hope no one answers this call. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about nonfiction versus fiction acting, because nonfiction is, in a way, acting itself. You're acting as the author, but it's kind of a different kind of read. So what are some of the differences for you guys between performing a dramatic piece versus a nonfiction piece?
Well, maybe you can take this, because I actually don't do a lot of nonfiction. But because I actually don't do a lot of nonfiction because I personally don't think I'm that great at it. I think nonfiction is a very specific skill, and that some people, and I've found this in all of the teaching that I've been doing, that some of my students are fantastic at nonfiction. They sound like they're just having a cup of coffee with their friend, telling you this crazy information that somebody else would be struggling over, and then I put them in the booth with fiction and they're a mess, right? And vice versa. So I think that nonfiction, this Kat said this in her class, which you should take. Or you can come take mine, because I just copy what Kat told me. So
I'm going to come take your class now.
Exactly. But that nonfiction really is about talking to your really smart friend, because you don't want to be condescending. You don't want to be like, I'm about to tell you all of this information that you don't know anything about. But you want it to be warm, and you want it to be welcoming. And so I think imagining that you're talking to your really smart best friend who just doesn't happen to know about the topic that book is on is hands down the best nonfiction advice I've ever gotten.
What makes someone strong to you? Like, what signals to you that someone's stronger in nonfiction?
Exactly that. I had a student a couple months ago who, when she got in the booth and just started reading this, she had brought it in, this like psychology book that I was like, I would listen to that, and I don't really care much about the topic or anything, but her voice and the way she embodied it, and it sounded like she really, really cared about this topic. And was very knowledgeable about it, but not in a condescending way. I perhaps maybe sound too condescending when I try to do nonfiction. Now I'm realizing.
Kat, I'm thinking about the Free State of Jones audiobook, because that is a piece of nonfiction, but then you've also got this audiobook competing with a film, which is a dramatization of real events. Like, how do you maintain a balance between the dramatization of very dramatic events, but it's also a piece of nonfiction. It's also someone's historical story.
So we did a couple of things with Free State of Jones. We talked with the author, Vicki Bynum, fairly extensively about her research. Mahershala was great in the studio because he had done a lot of research for the film, and they had spoken with these historians from Yale who came and kind of sat with the whole cast and crew to tell them about the real Free State of Jones County. So that was a great, great resource for us, and it was tough material. It was not. We weren't telling a fairy tale here. We were getting like really heavy into how many bales of hay did this farm produce in 1894, and it takes a real talent to make that something that you want to listen to, right? Because you're deep, deep into the inner workings of this historical event. So when we were in the studio, we focused a lot on bringing the author's words to life, and kind of getting out of the way of them. And those were Mahershala's words. He felt that it was his duty to just bring the story out and present it for people to listen to and to judge on their own. And I think that's part of nonfiction, especially history. Sometimes you're taking a viewpoint in the book, the author has a viewpoint, but you want to present the information and let people make their own decisions about what it is you're saying. So as long as you keep the tone upbeat and you keep it open, and friendly is maybe not the right word, but accessible, I think, is maybe the right word. You give people the ability to enter this information that you're just having a chat with them about. You're just letting them know, this is what happened in Jones County, Mississippi. By the way, let me just tell you this really cool story that I heard the other day about this historical thing that happened. And we had a great, great time working on it, coming at it from that way. And I think we always feel a responsibility to our authors. But in this one in particular, it was so much history that was just fraught with conflict, and there was a lot of revisionist history around it, and it was really bringing to light a lot of true events and things that happened, and it was based so much on the historical documents that it was easy to just present it and put it out there and say, here you go, do what you will with this.
That's so interesting. So how did you get through, those tougher bales of hay times? Like, how do you get past those dry facts? Like, how can you make that interesting?
We stopped a lot. We took a lot of breaks. We would get up, we would walk around, we would have tea. We would just take a break from it so it didn't get monotonous. And when you're reading a list, there are certain places where you stop and you give each item its own due, and you really pay attention to that punctuation, which is something in nonfiction which is so important, because you think these things have gone through a ton of editing. And when you're reading, no matter what it is you're reading, the punctuation tells you where to stop. It tells you where to pause, where to breathe, how much breath to give it. So we were looking at each item individually, and sometimes when it gets hard with any nonfiction, I say, picture it in your head. Have a picture of these bales of hay and these yards of cotton, and close your eyes and go through them and tell me what it is you're seeing. And that helps to keep it a lot more real and authentic, rather than monotone and just reading from a list when you're really describing something that happened. So it does, even in nonfiction, it goes back to storytelling.
We actually have a question from the audience about pacing, and how do you set pacing across different genres? In a nonfiction, you paint that picture in your head, but how do you decide how fast or how slow to take it in the material?
Mark?
Oh.
I think sci-fi is a really great genre to apply this to, because sometimes it gets so fast and furious, and in the reading and in the writing, and how do you deal with that vocally? How do you make that decision?
I think there are signals in how, oftentimes, not always, there's signals in how the author has punctuated. Sometimes some authors really are easy to read aloud because they seem to be hearing it in speech patterns in their head. So that helps. I think you're right that in nonfiction, punctuation is really important. Sometimes sentences, however, are so long that you just have to make an informed decision about where to take a breath within that. But in fiction, and this, I think there's a lot more leeway in fiction with punctuation and using it when it's helpful, and gently disregarding it when it's not, in favor of engrossing the listener in the story. So pace is really key to that. And I think that if you're putting yourself in the given circumstances of the scene and paying attention to how the signals the author is giving you with punctuation on the page about how he or she heard it, you're probably going to do it right. And I think, for example, in a sci-fi, there are times when a character is beholding the awesome wonder of space, and that is not a time to tell them to say that they're beholding the awesome wonder of space. Like you want to kind of behold that with them, and then there are other times when lasers are flying, and obviously you got to pick it up, and so it's really just it's what the characters or the narrator as a character is going through that and I think that being comfortable with silence is really important because I think when people read a book, when I'm just reading a book just for me, I just read along, and somehow my brain is picturing the pacing, but I'm reading it just at this pace, But when all you're doing is listening, the pace is so important, to suck them into what's happening.
To take them out of doing the laundry.
Make them pay attention. Yeah, right. Yeah, 'cause there's so many distractions.
The picture.
Is there anything that you do in particular? Like, how do you catch yourself when you're maybe not hitting the right pace?
Yeah, I think taking breaks is good because you can just get on the train sometimes, and then, like Mark said, I will and I annotate. You can make all these notes, so I often will make a line for myself if I want to take a pause there, even if there's not one that's written as an actual page break, or I'll draw a squiggly line down the side with like a star by it, and in my brain now I know that means like slow down here, this is important, right? So I have all this shorthand for myself in terms of tracking. It's like drawing a map for yourself to track your performance and shaping it in that way.
It all comes back to that prep work that you do.
Definitely.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. So let's talk about mysteries and thrillers, because that's another high, fast-paced genre. You know the end, presumably. I really hope you know the end. Unless it's a cliffhanger, but presumably you've prepped the book so you know how it ends.
Yeah.
So how are you building that suspense, not being too obvious and giving too much away? Do you make the choice to put in red herrings? How do you build that tension without giving too much away?
First of all, the very, 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 very first book I ever did was a mystery, and I prepped it really hard. So I read the whole book, then I read it in the studio, and then I listened to the whole book. And at the end, I was like, oh! So I don't know what to make of that, because that was the third time I was encountering the book, and I was like, she did it? I mean, so that's a little weird, but yeah, I think you do put in some red herrings. When you're prepping the book, you become acquainted with where the author has put in the red herrings, and then you can cut. You want to do it subtly, and then generally when I don't know if this wants to become a hard and fast rule or anything, but it all depends on the book. But the guilty party, you paint them rather. You just want to be in the skin of each character, So I don't know if you'd even. I think that's why I didn't remember that she did it, because I was just in her skin. We've been seeing the world from her point of view, I guess. Does that?
How do you
answer
get
the
how do you get into those characters' skin?
You just know who they are and what they want, I guess.
Yeah, point of view.
Do you make
Yeah,
choice? I mean,
like
are
a
you
point of
making
view.
choices about that? Are you working with the author to make those determinations about motivation or history, or does it just kind of come from within?
I think when you're just reading the book and, you just, it's a lot of mental focus. Both, I don't prep a book in the same way that I might read a book by myself. I'm really paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same thing when you're in there with the microphone, you're really paying attention. And so I think that's where I get it. I think it's mostly on the page,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a big mystery beyond that. Not for me. I mean, now that you mentioned contacting the author, though, it is always a good idea to contact the author in case there's anything in particular that they want to let you know about a character or the story in general and all of that.
And I think also now, so many authors are writing series that
Yeah.
now when I get approached by a new author or if I'm given a new book, the first thing I do is ask, is this going to become a series? Are there smaller characters within here that I'm going to give some crazy voice to because they're only
Yeah.
in one scene, and then suddenly, surprise, the next book is all from that character's point of view.
Sure.
So you do, again, speaking to the author about that and knowing, what's coming down the line. It's good.
Yeah.
But creating suspense is really about pace, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to do with pacing.
Sensing a theme here, you guys. So let's talk about romance. Piper, you have narrated over 50 titles in the romance and adult categories. So how did that become your? I mean, you're dominating the space. How did you get there? Not intended.
I'm very romantic.
But are you? Are you very romantic? How are you striking this balance when it comes to the sexy stuff?
Oh gosh, okay. We're going there. Okay. Well, so I actually, growing up, secretly loved romance novels. And as an English major, I would hide that even from myself, right? Because it was not cool. You were supposed to be studying all, the great classics, and then in the summers I would be like, Nora Roberts, yes. So I think that it's a genre that I just love myself, and so that probably comes out in the performance of it. I don't really know how I ended up doing so many or that becoming my niche, but I'm quite happy for it. I love them. There's some great romance writers out there, and I loved doing Harlequins when I was doing those, and everybody, especially in today's world, everybody loves escapism, and it's just another form of escapism, like sci-fi, just in a different way. You want these lives that these people have, and to just kind of escape to that simpler, more exciting time, I guess. And then the sexy stuff.
Mature content.
The sexy stuff. I can't even say it out loud unless it's written on the page. It's fun. It's actually really fun. I don't get embarrassed by it. I think that it's, there's definitely an audience for it. People really are want it. It's a really popular genre. And I don't have a problem with it. I think that, if you do have a problem with it as a narrator, obviously don't do it, and no one's going to judge you for that.
Sure.
And I have passed on some books that I've read or looked into that I'm like, no, that isn't really for me. I don't want to do that. But these writers are writing great stuff, and the really good ones are using the sexy scenes as part of the story and are enhancing the actual characters' lives with it, and it's not just thrown in
Gratuitous.
there.
Do you get the giggles?
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. And
What do you do?
Well, I just keep laughing usually because it lets out some sort of tension. But I think laughing is sexy, so trying to bring that into the performance of it too a little bit. You can't be so super serious about sex scenes that you're gonna just be so serious that it's boring. And also, I have to imagine that these authors, and some of them I know very, personally now, they're having fun writing it. They're not sitting there being like, how can I make this sexy, So I think that that's part of it. My favorite thing about those scenes, though, is misreading because it's always hilarious. Like, undoubtedly, I'll make it the least sexy thing. I'll be like, he touched her wrist. Nope, it's waist. Okay, great. You know, like, it's always something that's so not sexy.
Actually, so we have an appropriate question from the audience. John P. is asking what your tips are for creating varied female voices. I can't see the rest of that
As a
word.
male narrator.
As a male narrator, so let's hop across the stage.
Well,
But you've done a few romance titles yourself, so how are you handling that?
You know, you obviously you want to talk a little more softly. What I've learned is to not go too far with it. That the most important thing, like the first book or two that I did, I would voice the female characters way too high, and when I went back and listened to them, and then I would get some reviews. He sounds horrible when he does female voices. And I was like, that is true. I'm going to fix that. And so I find the thing to do is really not to overthink it. Like, just lighten it up a little, place it on a little higher register. It doesn't have to sound like a real woman, because it's never going to. So you really just want to play that character's intentions, just like you would any other character, and just lighten it a little. And so when it comes to women, I mean, I'm lucky if it's like a Russian character or something with a dialect. But when I have multiple women talking to each other, they sound a lot alike. And what you just choose a slightly you just make them in a slightly different register, just enough to know it's a different person talking, not enough to make it sound like a totally different person. And then the story does the rest. You know, so yeah, I guess I don't overthink it. What do you do when you're anything different or similar when you're doing
for
male
male voices?
Yeah, I'm actually doing a book right now that has 5 brothers in it.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And I've started using the term backyard barbecue scene because there's always a scene where the entire family is there, and you've got the mom and the dad and the 4 brothers or the 5 brothers and all their wives, and they all have lines. But I just vary the pitch slightly. What I start to focus on when I have multiple characters like that is pace and switching up that, like, one brother is like the really laid back guy, and I've gotten that from the text. I don't just, make that up.
Yeah.
But that one, his outlook on life is very easygoing, so he might talk more slowly. And then there's the brother that's, the youngest and really excited all the time and might talk more quickly. And so I try and vary it that way because there's only so much I can do with my register.
There's always a suspension of disbelief when you're talking about
Sure.
audiobooks. Mark is as great as you are. We don't think you've actually turned into an alien in the booth.
Right.
And in the same way, we don't think you've actually turned into a woman in the booth. And we always have people who come in and really try to do it with the pitch of their voice, and you're going to kill your voice. You're going to not talk for 5 or 6 days after that because it's going to hurt so much.
Yeah.
So that pacing and just kind of the cadence of your speech is how you do it. I'm listening to a book with Jay Snyder in it, and he does really, really great women's voices, and Jay's got that big, deep voice, and he doesn't bring it up too much, but he makes them just more gentle in the way that he narrates them, and I think that works really successfully for him.
So while we're talking about voice modulation, how do you go younger, or should you even try? I mean, teen and young adult is such a huge category, and it crosses over into every genre we've talked about, into sci-fi and fantasy, into romance. I mean, do you go younger? How do you,
I think it's an energy thing. That some of Jacinda's books, the characters have started out in their late teens, and then by the end of the book they're 10 years older, 28. And so I think she does, and so many authors do a great job of writing from that different age. So it kind of does the work for you. You kind of get out of the way. But, popping the pitch up a little bit, but mostly just because of the energy of it. And then a more mature sound comes in towards the end. I think that's pretty much how I focus on it.
Yeah.
We all concur.
Same.
The right answer was given.
well done.
Moving on.
So as I just mentioned, though, crossover between genre is increasingly popular. To sell more books, people are starting to layer in suspense and romance, or sci-fi and young adult, or sci-fi and mystery.
Vampire romance.
Vampire romance, paranormal romances are so huge. So how do you create an even tone between two different genres, which may normally be kind of at odds with each other?
Vampires need love too. It's all. No,
That's fair.
I mean, I have done quite a few of the vampire romances, and I think you just think of them as real people.
Mm-hmm.
They are, when
They're kind of
when
real
it's
people.
not night, they're real people. So I think that's it all comes back to point of view
Yeah.
and their outlook on life, and yeah, I don't know, maybe
just
alien
the
crossover.
given
is harder.
circumstances of whatever the book is, and if that means there are zombies chasing you and you're in love, then that's the way it is.
That's often how it happens.
Yeah, right, exactly. Sometimes it can lead to that.
So I want to go back to something that I picked up on a second ago. You said you read your reviews. do you read your reviews regularly? Is that a one-time thing?
I check in every now and then. Yeah.
Do you
I
take
check in.
feedback from that, or do you just kind of check in and check out?
That the criticism about this was a very early book, mind you. I have not gotten this criticism in quite some time, but that the female voices weren't quite working for this one listener. I was really glad to read that. I was like, yeah, because you know what? I felt that way too, but I thought, oh, maybe nobody noticed, but he noticed, and so I adjusted what I was doing and my approach. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it can be useful. It really, yeah. Or if there's a book that you feel like, it's always, it's nice to know if they liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because you're working, more and more you're working as in a partnership with these authors, and they have these fan bases. And I check in on the reviews, especially if I know it's a series, because I want to make sure that I'm on, if all of the reviews from this author's fan base are negative, then we have a serious problem, right? That hasn't happened yet. But, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and that the author's fans are happy with the way that it's coming out, and that I know that I'm on the right track for the rest of the series also. If you're getting a one-off negative review about something, I think as any performer, it's good to check in and be like, oh, do I do that? Is that true? And then know enough about yourself and your training and your product to say, no, actually, that's not true. That's just that one person's opinion, and move on. Or be like what you did. I think that's so smart, of being like, yeah, actually, I take this to heart, and I'm going to work on that, and I'm going to think about that and maybe fix it. So, yeah.
I think knowing yourself and your craft, though, is really important.
Yeah.
If you do choose to read your reviews.
Definitely.
I know some actors who don't.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while they'll sort of break down and do it, and then they have a little bit of a crisis.
Yeah.
But to have that confidence in your training and yourself to say, okay, I do that and I can fix it, or I don't do that. I think maybe that person's just hearing it wrong. But we have such loyal listeners that I think these reviews, especially from people who have written 10, 20, 50 reviews, are valuable, because a lot of the time they do know what they're talking about, and they're usually positive.
Yeah.
Our listeners
And they
are so
listen to
loyal.
a lot
They
of
listen to
books,
so
so
many
they kind of
books.
know.
Yeah,
what
Yeah.
they're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And people will listen to a book just because of the narrator, which, on the flip side of getting some bad criticism, is something that's really, must be fantastic
Yeah,
for you
it's
guys.
nice. In the
Yeah.
theater,
Awesome.
we take a bow at the end, and everybody claps for us, and we don't get to do that at the end of a book. So it's nice to go and read the reviews sometimes. It feels like taking a bow.
Do you want us to clap when you come out of the
Yeah.
studio? I can arrange that for you guys. I can do that.
Oh, that
Great.
would be
They
nice.
open the door and the applause starts. I think we
Right.
should get on
I'm
installing
on
that.
it.
That
It'll
sounds
happen
good.
starting tomorrow.
I can't believe it. We're getting close to the end of our time together. So I want to ask you guys kind of your final thoughts. What would you say is, one takeaway that, somebody who's looking to really start shaping the performance side of their audiobook recording, not just doing the work, but taking it to the next level. What advice would each of you guys give? And I'll start here with you.
I would say listen to other audiobooks, listen to the top performers. You can go on Audible, you can go to bestsellers, you can see who those narrators are. You can look on, APA's website that has all the Audie nominees every year, see who's getting nominated year after year after year, and listen to those people. I listened to The Fault in Our Stars that Kate Rudd did, and I've listened to it twice, and it's one of my favorite audiobooks, and I actually learned a lot from listening to her performance, and I'd already been doing this for many years. So I think that the more that you can just listen and listen and listen, the better you're going to become.
Mark, final
Yeah, I
thought?
completely agree, and I would add to that, listen to yourself. Like if you're, I think when you listen to these other authors, if you're looking to break into the business or get deeper at the craft or whatever, and you're kind of newish, listen like with a really critical ear. Like don't just enjoy the listen of these other people, but listen and pay attention to what they're doing. Pay attention to how long of a caesura, what's the caesura like between the he said and the rest of the line, and what do they, just pay attention, and then take out your iPhone and read a book and listen to that. Don't think that it's surprising when you're reading, you might think that something felt like that didn't make sense. You go back and listen, you're like, actually that did, because the words are in that order and I read them in the right order, and you don't have to worry too much, and it made sense. Or you might think, God, I really felt that, and you go back and listen, you're like, I was milking that too much, I gotta ease off. So go back and listen to yourself. That's what and then you can teach yourself. You just have to really be honest with yourself about, what am I doing that's not working? What am I doing that is working?
Good thought. Kat, final recommendation?
Know your voice, know your genres, know your niche, and where you fit vocally, and what you're really good at, and do your prep work, and then let go when you step into the booth, because it will take over, and you will get into that flow, and you're going to have a great end product once you learn how to do that.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. You guys have been wonderful, and I hope you guys at home have enjoyed it too. That's all the time we've got for today, but I hope you'll join us next week for our third session, the Studio Gear Review. Moderator Scott Jacoby is going to take you guys into the booth and talk about gear, what you need, where you can save, where you can splurge, and what you need to get that sweet sound. So we'll see you guys all next week, and thanks for joining us.